In the labyrinthine alleys of Beirut, where whispers of war echo through the night, a lone woman clutched her swollen belly, her eyes scanning the shadows not for safety, but for an opportunity to strike. What appeared as the fragile vulnerability of impending motherhood was, in fact, Mossad's most audacious weapon, a deception that would pierce the heart of Hezbollah and alter the course of a decades-long shadow war. February 12, 2008, Damascus, Syria. The air hung heavy with the scent of jasmine and diesel as Imad Mughniyeh stepped out of his silver Mitsubishi Pajero, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow under the dim streetlights of the upscale Kafr Sousa neighborhood. Known to his enemies as the Ghost, Mughniyeh had evaded capture for over 2 decades, his name synonymous with terror. From the 1983 Beirut barracks bombings that claimed 241 American lives to the 1992 Israeli embassy attack in Buenos Aires. But on this crisp winter evening, as he adjusted his coat against the chill, Mughniyeh allowed himself a rare moment of unguarded reflection. He thought of his family, scattered and hidden, the price of his unyielding devotion to Hezbollah's cause. Little did he know, the threads of his fate were already being woven by an invisible hand, one that had infiltrated deeper than he could imagine. Miles away, in a nondescript apartment in Tel Aviv, Tamar Levy, codename Eden, stared at her reflection in a cracked mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she strapped the prosthetic belly beneath her loose abaya. At 32, Tamar was no stranger to the razor edge of espionage. Born in Haifa to Holocaust survivors, she had joined Mossad straight out of her mandatory military service, driven by a quiet fire that burned for the security of her homeland. But this mission, Operation Silent Womb, demanded something more profound: the illusion of life itself. The fake pregnancy, crafted from silicone and weighted to mimic the sway of a 7-month term, concealed a compact recording device and a hidden compartment for microfilm. It was her ticket into the heart of Hezbollah's inner circle, a disguise that played on the cultural reverence for motherhood in the Arab world, turning sympathy into access. Tamar's journey to this moment had begun years earlier, amid the smoldering ruins of the 2006 Lebanon War. That brutal 34-day conflict had left over 1,200 Lebanese dead, mostly civilians, and 165 Israelis, including soldiers and reservists. Hezbollah, backed by Iran, had fired thousands of rockets into northern Israel, forcing 1 million people into bomb shelters. The war ended in a stalemate, but for Mossad Director Mir Dagan, it was a wake-up call. "We cannot afford another such humiliation," Dagan had declared in a classified briefing at Mossad headquarters in Glilo, north of Tel Aviv, on August 14, 2006, the very day the ceasefire took hold. Dagan, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, paced the room, his prosthetic eye, a remnant of his own combat wounds, fixed on the maps of southern Lebanon. The global context was dire. Iran's nuclear ambitions loomed large, with Hezbollah serving as Tehran's proxy army on Israel's northern border. The group had grown from a ragtag militia in the 1980s to a formidable force with an arsenal of 100,000 rockets, sophisticated tunnels, and a network of spies stretching from Beirut to Damascus and beyond. The emotional stakes were personal for everyone in that room. Dagan spoke of his granddaughter, who had spent weeks huddled in a Haifa shelter during the rocket barrages. "This is not just about borders," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's about our children sleeping without fear." Mossad's analysts painted a grim picture. Hezbollah's military chief, Imad Mughniyeh, was rebuilding faster than expected, smuggling weapons through Syria with Iranian funds. Traditional surveillance, drones, satellites, human intelligence networks had hit walls. Mughniyeh was paranoid, rarely staying in one place, surrounded by loyalists who vetted every newcomer. They needed something unconventional, a penetration that exploited human frailty. Enter the idea of the fake pregnancy. It originated from a junior analyst, inspired by historical precedents like the CIA's use of disguises in Cold War operations. But Mossad refined it into an art. Tamar was selected after rigorous psychological evaluations. Her fluency in Arabic, honed during undercover stints in Jordan, made her ideal. She underwent months of training in a secret facility near Jerusalem, learning to walk with the prosthetic's weight, simulating morning sickness, even practicing labored breathing to sell the ruse. The device itself was a marvel of Israeli ingenuity. Developed by Mossad's technology unit, it included a hidden microphone capable of transmitting encrypted audio bursts to a relay station in Cyprus. By early 2007, the operation was greenlit. Tamar's cover story, a Palestinian refugee named Layla Khalil, displaced from the Nahar al-Bared camp in Lebanon, seeking shelter in Beirut after her husband was killed in an Israeli airstrike. The fake pregnancy added layers of vulnerability, ensuring she would be taken in by Hezbollah's social welfare network, which provided aid to widows and orphans as a recruitment tool. On March 15, 2007, Tamar crossed into Lebanon via a smuggling route through the Golan Heights, her heart pounding as Syrian border guards waved her through, their eyes softening at the sight of her condition. Life in Beirut was a tense ballet of deception. Tamar settled in the Dahiyeh suburb, Hezbollah's stronghold, renting a cramped room in a building run by the group's charitable arm. She attended prenatal classes at a clinic funded by Iran, where she befriended wives of mid-level operatives. The human cost weighed on her daily, the children playing in streets laced with hidden bunkers, the mothers who shared stories of loss over sweet tea. One evening, as artillery echoed from the south, a woman named Fatima confided in her about her brother's role in smuggling arms. Tamar nodded sympathetically, her hidden recorder capturing every word, while inside she grappled with the moral fog of her mission. Was she saving lives back home, or perpetuating a cycle of vengeance? As weeks turned to months, Tamar's infiltration deepened. She volunteered at a Hezbollah community center, distributing food parcels and listening to sermons praising Mughniyeh as a hero. The tension was palpable. Every glance from a security guard could spell exposure. One night, in June 2007, she narrowly escaped disaster when a routine pat-down at a checkpoint stopped short of her belly, cultural taboos working in her favor. The intelligence she gathered was gold. Details on Mughniyeh's safe houses in Damascus, his travel patterns, even the names of Iranian Quds Force liaisons. But the operation wasn't without its toll. Tamar missed her own family, the simple joys of a life without lies. In coded messages relayed through dead drops, she confessed to her handler the isolation, the constant fear that one slip could end everything. Yet, the stakes propelled her forward. Globally, the Middle East teetered on the brink. Syria's alliance with Iran threatened regional stability, while the U.S. grappled with Iraq and Afghanistan, viewing Hezbollah as an extension of Tehran's reach. Mossad knew that striking Mughniyeh would send shockwaves, disrupting supply lines and boosting Israeli morale after the 2006 debacle. By late 2007, Tamar's reports had pinpointed Mughniyeh's vulnerabilities. She learned of his occasional visits to Damascus for meetings with Syrian intelligence. Away from Hezbollah's fortified enclaves, the pieces were falling into place for the final act, a car bomb meticulously planned. But as Tamar lay in her bed one night, hand on her false belly, she wondered about the consequences. Would this bring peace or ignite a fiercer retaliation? The human element gnawed at her. Mughniyeh was a monster to her people, but to his followers, a martyr in waiting. Back in Damascus on that February evening in 2008, Mughniyeh walked toward a meeting, oblivious to the eyes watching from afar. The explosion that would soon rip through his vehicle was the culmination of patience, ingenuity, and sacrifice. But the story of how Mossad got there, the woman who carried deception in her womb, was just beginning to unfold. The Damascus night of February 12, 2008, carried the faint promise of spring, but for Tamar Levy, still known to those around her as Layla Khalil, the winter of her deception had not yet thawed. She had returned to Beirut days earlier, the prosthetic belly now a constant, aching reminder of the life she pretended to carry. Her reports from the community center had grown more precise. Mughniyeh's Damascus visits followed a pattern tied to meetings with Iranian Quds Force officers, always under the cover of Syrian protection. One name kept surfacing in hushed conversations: General Mohammed Suleiman, Assad's trusted military advisor, who hosted these gatherings in a quiet villa in Kafr Sousa. Tamar's hidden microphone had captured fragments, dates, approximate times, the low rumble of approval when Mughniyeh's name was mentioned as the one who never sleeps. In Tel Aviv, the war room at Glilot buzzed with controlled urgency. Mayor Dagan stood before a wall of screens, his single good eye tracing the red lines connecting Beirut to Damascus. The intelligence mosaic was nearly complete, thanks in no small part to Tamar's persistence. But Dagan knew the final piece required something irreversible: a joint operation with the Americans. The CIA had long hunted Mughniyeh for his role in the 1983 Marine barracks bombing, and in late 2007, Mossad director Dagan had quietly passed coordinates to Langley. "We have eyes inside," he told his counterpart over a secure line, "but we need your hand on the trigger." The Americans agreed, but with conditions. The hit must look unilateral to avoid inflaming Syrian-Iranian retaliation against U.S. interests in the region. Mossad would provide the target. The CIA would supply the explosive expertise, a small, precise charge hidden in the spare tire of a parked Mitsubishi Pajero. Tamar felt the shift in the air even before her handler's encrypted message arrived via a dead drop in a Beirut bakery. The operation was moving to execution phase. Her role now was containment, maintain cover, feed any last-minute disinformation to confuse Hezbollah security if questions arose about unusual Syrian traffic. She attended one more prenatal checkup at the Hezbollah-funded clinic, her doctor noting the baby's strong heartbeat while she memorized the faces of two new women, wives of operatives recently promoted after Mughniyeh's quiet endorsement. The emotional weight pressed harder now. Fatima, the woman who had first welcomed her to Dahiyeh, had begun asking about Layla's family. "When the baby comes," Fatima said one afternoon over mint tea, "you'll need a name that honors the resistance." Tamar smiled through the nausea she no longer had to fake, murmuring something about naming him after a martyr. Inside, the lie twisted like a knife. As February approached, Tamar's nights grew shorter. She lay awake listening to the distant thump of artillery from the south, wondering if the child she pretended to carry would ever know a world without this war. Her handler, a veteran Katza named Avi, met her in coded bursts, short walks through crowded souks where he passed instructions folded into cigarette packs. "You're pulling back after the strike," he whispered once. "Extraction window opens immediately." But Tamar knew better than to count on clean exits. Hezbollah's counterintelligence was tightening. Whispers of ghosts in the walls circulated after a recent arms shipment was intercepted. She had seen the looks: a security man lingering too long near her door, another asking casually about her late husband. The fake pregnancy shielded her still. No one dared search a heavily pregnant widow. But the margin for error was shrinking. On the evening of February 11th, Tamar received the final signal. A single red thread tied to her apartment doorknob, a sign that Mughniyeh was en route to Damascus for what would be his last meeting. She spent the night packing essentials into a small bag hidden under floorboards. False documents, a burner phone, the recording device now emptied of its microfilm. Dawn broke gray and cold. She walked to the community center as usual, distributing blankets to families displaced by border skirmishes. Children tugged at her abaya, asking when the baby would arrive. "Soon," she told them, her voice steady while her pulse raced. Each interaction felt like farewell. Across the border in Damascus, the trap was set. A nondescript SUV, its spare tire packed with a sophisticated explosive device developed in joint Mossad-CIA labs, waited in the shadows of Kafr Sousa. The bomb was no crude device. It used facial recognition software linked to a remote trigger, ensuring only Mughniyeh would die. Two Mossad surveillance teams, one posing as Syrian businessmen, another as local laborers, confirmed his arrival at the safe house around 8 p.m. Mughniyeh, ever cautious, left his silver Pajero parked nearby, and entered on foot. Inside, he met Suleiman and Iranian liaisons, discussing rocket resupplies and contingency plans should Israel strike again. Tamar, back in Beirut, waited in her room with the lights off. Her radio, tuned to a Hezbollah station, played nasheeds praising the resistance. At 10:45 p.m. Damascus time, 11:45 in Beirut, a low boom rolled through encrypted channels. Tamar's handler's voice crackled through a hidden earpiece. "Target down, clean." She exhaled, the sound muffled by her hand. Mughniyeh was gone, killed instantly as he exited the building, the blast tearing through his body while leaving the structure largely intact. Hezbollah would later claim it was an Israeli operation, vowing revenge that would echo for years. But for Tamar, the mission was far from over. Within hours, suspicion would ripple through Dahiyeh. Word traveled fast in tight communities. Questions would turn to the quiet Palestinian widow who had listened so attentively. She needed to vanish before the net closed. As sirens wailed in distant Damascus and celebrations erupted in Tel Aviv, Tamar slipped out into the Beirut night, her false belly discarded in a dumpster behind the bakery. The woman who had carried deception for her country now carried only the weight of what came next. The Beirut streets felt narrower in the hours after the Damascus blast. News traveled like dry grass in wind, first as muffled rumors in the coffee shops of Dahiyeh, then as shouted headlines on Hezbollah's Al-Manar television. "Zionist treachery claims the life of our commander," the anchor intoned, voice thick with controlled fury. A grainy photograph of Imad Mughniyeh filled the screen, the same one that had hung in countless homes and offices across the Shiite South. Mourners gathered outside the group's headquarters, fists raised, chanting his name as if volume alone could resurrect him. In Tel Aviv, meanwhile, champagne corks popped quietly in secure rooms. Mossad officers embraced, tears mixing with quiet laughter. For one night, the balance felt restored. Tamar Levy moved through that night like smoke. She had shed the prosthetic belly behind a row of overflowing dumpsters near the Burj El Barajne refugee camp, the silicone shell landing with a dull thud among rotting fruit and plastic bags. Without it, she felt strangely light, exposed. The abaya still hung loose on her frame, but now it concealed only the bruises from months of carrying extra weight and the small scar on her left forearm from a childhood accident, marks of the real woman beneath the legend. She carried one small backpack, new Lebanese identity papers naming her Amal Haddad, a modest sum in cash, a single burner phone, and the emotional residue of every conversation she had recorded. Her extraction plan was elegant in its simplicity, brutal in its urgency. Avi, her handler, had drilled it into her during their last face-to-face in a Hamra Street bookstore. Move at first light, avoid main roads, use the chaos of morning to slip south toward the Litani River. From there, a fishing boat, arranged through a Druze contact who owed Mossad a favor, would carry her to a rendezvous point off the coast where an Israeli naval vessel waited in international waters. The window was narrow. Hezbollah would soon lock down Dahiyeh, search homes, interrogate anyone who had been too friendly with strangers. They would look for the pregnant widow first. Tamar spent the remaining hours of darkness in a derelict apartment on the edge of the camp, a place she had scouted weeks earlier as a fallback. She sat on the bare mattress, knees drawn up, listening to the city grieve. Through the thin walls came the sound of women wailing, men arguing in low, angry tones. She thought of Fatima, the kind woman who had once pressed a small silver bracelet into her palm for the baby's protection. Would Fatima remember Layla's face when the investigators came knocking? Would she connect the quiet listener to the ghost who had vanished on the night their leader died? At 4:17 a.m., Tamar slipped out. The streets were still dark, lit only by the occasional sodium lamp and the glow from television screens left on in living rooms. She walked with the deliberate slowness of someone who belonged nowhere in particular, head slightly bowed, shoulders rounded, the posture of a woman recently bereaved. She avoided the main boulevards where Hezbollah checkpoints had already begun to multiply. Instead, she threaded through back alleys, past shuttered shops and piles of construction debris, the smell of diesel and night-blooming jasmine clinging to her clothes. Dawn was breaking, pale and reluctant, when she reached the southern outskirts of the city. Here the buildings gave way to open lots and half-finished concrete skeletons, remnants of the 2006 war that no one had bothered to rebuild. A battered white Peugeot waited in the shadow of an unfinished overpass, engine idling. The driver, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard and the calm eyes of someone who had ferried worse cargo than this, did not speak her name. He simply opened the rear door. Tamar slid inside, pulling a black headscarf low over her forehead. They drove south in silence. The Litani River appeared as a silver ribbon under the rising sun, its banks lined with eucalyptus and barbed wire. Hezbollah patrols were visible in the distance, jeeps moving slowly along dirt tracks. But the driver knew the backways, the paths used by smugglers since the 1980s. At a narrow bend in the river, hidden by reeds, a small wooden boat rocked gently against the bank. Two fishermen in oil-stained sweaters helped Tamar aboard without a word. The engine coughed to life, and the boat slipped into the current, heading west toward the open Mediterranean. As the Lebanese coastline receded, Tamar allowed herself the first full breath in months. She removed the headscarf, letting the salt wind tangle her hair. The fisherman offered her water and a piece of flatbread. She accepted both, though her stomach still churned with adrenaline and guilt. She thought of the children in Dahiyeh who had touched her false belly with wonder. She thought of Mughniyeh's daughter, who would now grow up without a father, the same daughter he had once hidden in Iran to protect from Israeli assassins. The cycle spun on, unbroken. Out at sea, the Israeli missile boat appeared on the horizon like a gray predator. Its crew lowered a rigid-hulled inflatable. Strong hands pulled Tamar aboard. She was wrapped in a thermal blanket, given hot tea, examined quickly by a medic. No one asked questions. They knew who she was. As the boat turned toward Haifa, Tamar looked back one last time at the fading coastline. Somewhere in those hills, Hezbollah was already planning its response. The retaliation would come, rockets, perhaps kidnappings, assassinations of their own. But for now, the mission was done. In Tel Aviv, Mayor Dagan waited in his office, blinds drawn against the morning sun. When the secure line rang and the duty officer confirmed, "Asset aboard en route home," he allowed himself a single nod. Then he turned to the map still pinned to the wall, southern Lebanon marked with red pins representing known Hezbollah positions. The war was not over. It never really ended. But today, at least, the scales had tipped, just a little. Tamar stepped onto Israeli soil at 11:42 a.m. on February 13, 2008. She did not cry. She simply walked past the honor guard, past the medical team, past the waiting debriefers, until she reached a small room with a single window overlooking the Mediterranean. There, alone for the first time in nearly a year, she placed her hand on her real, flat stomach and whispered to no one in particular, "It's over." But even as she said the words, she knew they were not true. Haifa, Israel, February 13th, 2008. The debriefing room smelled of strong coffee and printer ink, the kind of sterile calm that follows violence. Tamar Levy sat at the long metal table, still in the same clothes she had worn crossing the Mediterranean, salt-crusted abaya, now replaced with a plain gray tracksuit issued by the naval base. Her hair, freed from the headscarf, fell in dark waves damp from the shower. Across from her sat Mayor Dagan himself, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a fresh bandage on his right hand from some minor injury no one asked about. Two senior Katsas flanked him, notebooks open but pens still. They had already listened to the raw audio files Tamar carried out. Hours of murmured conversations, names, dates, coordinates. Now they wanted the rest, the things that didn't make it onto tape. Dagan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You gave us Mughniyeh," he said quietly. "But you also gave us something bigger. The Iranians didn't know we were that close. They still don't. That buys time." He paused, studying her face. "How much did it cost you?" Tamar met his gaze. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind during the boat ride. but the words came out raw anyway. I listened to women talk about their dead husbands, their missing sons. I smiled when children asked to feel the baby kick. I let them believe I was one of them. She looked down at her hands. Short nails, no rings, the same hands that had once cradled a false life. Every day I told myself it was for the greater good. Some nights I believed it. Dagan nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement. He had heard versions of this confession before, from agents who came back from Syria, from Gaza, from Tehran. The ones who didn't come back left no confessions at all. "You're not the first to carry that weight," he said. "You won't be the last, but you're home now, that matters." The debrief stretched into the afternoon. They walked her through every checkpoint, every conversation, every near miss. When she described the moment the red thread appeared on her doorknob, the final signal that Mughniyeh was moving, Tamar's voice never wavered. But when they asked about Fatima, the woman who had given her the silver bracelet, something cracked. "She'll think Layla betrayed her," Tamar said. "She'll think the baby was never real." One of the Katzas started to speak, then stopped. There was no comfort to offer. By evening, the technical teams had confirmed the strike's success. Mughniyeh's body, identified by dental records and a distinctive scar on his left hand, was already being prepared for a funeral that would draw tens of thousands to Beirut's southern suburbs. Hezbollah's Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, appeared on Al-Manar that night from an undisclosed location, eyes burning behind thick glasses. "Imad Mughniyeh is not dead," he declared. "He lives in every rocket, in every fighter, in every drop of blood we shed for Palestine." The threat was clear. Vengeance would come, and it would be patient. In the days that followed, Tamar was moved to a safe house in the Galilee, a modest stone cottage overlooking olive groves. Mossad psychologists visited twice a week. They spoke in gentle tones about reintegration, about nightmares, about the way certain smells, jasmine, diesel, mint tea, could trigger panic months later. Tamar listened politely, answered their questions, but offered little. She preferred the silence of the hills. She walked the dirt paths each morning, letting the wind carry away the echoes of Dahiyeh. Sometimes she placed a hand on her stomach, an unconscious habit, then caught herself and let it fall away. Across the border, Hezbollah began its slow, methodical hunt. They interrogated dozens in Dahiyeh, community workers, clinic staff, neighbors. The pregnant widow named Layla Khalil became a phantom. No hospital records of her delivery existed. No one remembered seeing her after the night of February 12th. Some whispered she had fled to Syria in grief. Others suspected she had been an informant all along. Fatima, the woman who had welcomed her, was questioned for hours. She cried when they showed her a composite sketch based on vague descriptions. She seemed so tired, Fatima told them. So alone. She never mentioned the bracelet. Perhaps she kept it as a private memorial to a friendship that had never truly existed. Mossad, meanwhile, watched the ripples spread. Iranian shipments to Hezbollah slowed for months. Quds Force commanders grew paranoid, rerouting convoys, changing protocols. Syrian intelligence doubled security around their own officers. The operation had not only eliminated a high-value target, it had sown distrust at the very top of the axis. Dagan, in private briefings with the Prime Minister, called it the gift that keeps giving. But he never mentioned Tamar by name outside the inner circle. She had become, in agency parlance, the asset who walked out of the womb. Spurg arrived. Almond trees bloomed white along the ridges. Tamar began to sleep through the night again, though the dreams still came, children's laughter turning to sirens, a silver bracelet glinting in the dark. One afternoon in late March, she received a sealed envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a single photograph. A newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket taken in a Tel Aviv maternity ward. A handwritten note was clipped to the back. For the child who was never born, from someone who understands carrying ghosts. F. Tamar stared at the image for a long time. She did not know who F was. Perhaps Fatima, perhaps a case officer with a sense of poetry, perhaps no one at all. She folded the photograph carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box she kept on the windowsill. Then she stepped outside into the sunlight, closed the door behind her, and kept walking. The shadow war continued. Rockets would fly again. Agents would disappear. But for a brief moment in the quiet between missions, Tamar allowed herself to believe that some small piece of the darkness had been pushed back. Galilee, Israel, late April 2008. The almond blossoms had given way to young green fruit, heavy on the branches, and the air carried the sharp scent of wild thyme crushed underfoot. Tamar Levy walked the same dirt path each morning, now extending her route past the olive grove to a low stone wall overlooking the Hula Valley. From there she could see the faint blue line of the Golan Heights, and beyond it, though invisible, the border with Syria. She no longer hurried. The urgency that had defined her for nearly a year had drained away, leaving space for quieter things. The call of a hoopoe, the rustle of wind through eucalyptus, the slow turning of seasons. Mossad had offered her options: desk work in Glylo, training new recruits, even early retirement with a pension generous enough to disappear somewhere quiet, perhaps Cyprus, perhaps New Zealand. She declined them all. "I need time," she told the psychologist during their final session. "Not another mission. Not yet." The agency respected the request. They kept her identity buried deep, her file marked with the highest classification. To the outside world, Layla Khalil had never existed, and Tamar Levy had simply taken an extended leave after a long posting abroad. Neighbors in the small moshav where she stayed asked no questions. They recognized the look of someone returning from places that left marks. The photograph in the wooden box remained on the windowsill. Tamar took it out occasionally, studying the newborn's tiny clenched fist, the soft curve of its cheek. She still did not know who had sent it. The handwriting was deliberately neutral. The initial F could have belonged to Fatima, to a colleague playing a gentle joke, or to no one she had ever met. It did not matter. The image had become a kind of anchor, a reminder that life continued on the other side of deception, fragile and insistent. Across the border, the retaliation unfolded in slow motion, exactly as anticipated. On July 12, 2008, the second anniversary of the start of the 2006 war, Hezbollah launched a cross-border raid near Avivim, killing 2 Israeli soldiers and capturing 2 others in a swift professional operation. The move was symbolic, a direct message. Mughniyeh's blood had not been forgotten. Israel responded with airstrikes on Hezbollah positions in the Bekaa Valley. Rocket barrages answered from southern Lebanon. The exchange lasted 3 days, claimed a handful of lives on each side, then subsided into the familiar tense quiet. Neither side wanted full war, not yet. Tamar followed the news on a small battery-powered radio, never the television. She listened to the casualty counts, the names released, the statements from Nasrallah promising a new equation. She felt no triumph, no despair, only the dull recognition that the machine kept turning. Mughniyeh's death had disrupted Hezbollah's command structure for a season, delayed Iranian arms shipments, forced reorganizations that cost time and lives. But the group endured. It always had. One evening in early September, as the first cool nights arrived, Tamar received an unexpected visitor. Avi, her old handler, arrived unannounced in a dusty Subaru, carrying a paper bag of fresh burekas from a bakery in Kiryat Shmona. They sat on the stone patio as the sun dropped behind the hills, the sky turning the color of bruised apricots. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Avi set the bag between them and said, "They're promoting me. Desk in Europe. Less running, more paper." Tamar smiled faintly. "You'll hate it." "Probably." He looked at her directly. "You could come with me. Training section, you'd be good at it. Teaching them how not to get caught." She shook her head. "I'm done pretending for a while." Avi nodded, unsurprised. "Fair enough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was the silver bracelet Fatima had given her in Dahiyeh. Simple, etched with tiny vines. "One of our people recovered it from a safe house after the funeral. Thought you might want it back." Tamar took the bracelet, turning it slowly in the fading light. The metal was cool against her skin. She slipped it onto her wrist, the same wrist that had once carried hidden recorders and false weight. It fit perfectly. "Thank you," she said. Avi stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "If you ever change your mind about the desk job, I know where to find you." He left without another word, the Subaru's taillights disappearing down the unpaved road. Tamar remained on the patio until full dark, listening to crickets and distant traffic on Route 90. When she finally went inside, she did not turn on the light. Instead, she opened the wooden box, placed the bracelet beside the photograph of the unknown baby, and closed the lid. Months passed. Years would follow. Tamar eventually left the Galilee for a small apartment in Haifa, near the sea. She took occasional consulting work, analytical, never field. She learned to cook Lebanese dishes from memory, though she never ate them with anyone. She kept the bracelet and the photograph, moving them from one windowsill to the next, silent companions to a life rebuilt in fragments. The shadow war never stopped. New names rose to replace Mughniyeh's, new commanders, new safe houses, new plots uncovered in the dead of night. Mossad continued its patient, ruthless work, and somewhere in the ranks younger operatives studied redacted files, whispered legends of a woman who carried a bomb in her womb and walked away alive. Tamar rarely spoke of it. When she did, it was only to say, "We do what we must, then we live with what we've done." And in the quiet hours when the Mediterranean wind moved the curtains and the bracelet caught moonlight on her wrist, she sometimes allowed herself to imagine a different ending, one where no one carried ghosts, where children grew up without learning the weight of secrets too soon. It was not a hope she believed in. It was simply a place her mind went when the nights grew long. The war continued. But Tamar Levy, once known as Layla Khalil, had come home.